Hello, hello. I believe we are now live. This is the first live remote option concert that we are presenting. The last few weeks have been all hits from the archive, but this is the very first live show. And tonight we've got a really great one for you. We've got Jon Mueller, who is broadcasting in live from Milwaukee, and he's going to play some solo music. And he'll play a 15-ish minute or so piece at the front of the program, and then we're gonna discuss his work, and then he'll continue on with another piece a little bit later on. So I'm not going to take up too much time here, but definitely if you are watching the set and you have questions that come to mind that you would like to ask during the Q&A, drop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. All right, without any further ado, please welcome Jon Mueller. All right. Thank you so much, Jon Mueller. That was a wonderful piece. I wanted to maybe start out our conversation here by just seeing if you would like to talk a little bit about your process with that first piece, whether it be describing some of the sound sources or some techniques that you're using, if you want to speak to that a little bit, just right off the bat.
Sure. Well, I guess since this whole situation started with being at home and not being around other people and not having that collaborative input, I started going through some older recordings and some recent recordings just to see if ideas would come up in terms of reworking stuff. And what I discovered was a lot of the gong and some of the earlier percussion recordings that I had come across of mine. Actually, I could do some interesting things with, and what I mean by that is they sort of became a secondary player for me. So I've been taking recordings that I have previously done and processing them in certain ways, and then playing along, improvising along with them with different percussion. So this performance was a good opportunity to do that in a live setting in a somewhat controlled environment. I mean, being at home, I can have everything set up in a certain way, and and just in terms of the audio, like I can understand, exactly what I need to hear and how to hear it. And so because it's much quieter than a lot of the work that I've done previously, it's just I think an ideal setting for me to work and try this out in, being at home. So thank you for doing this.
Of course. I want to take a quick moment to just remind everyone, or share for the first time for folks who may have just tuned in. If you have any thoughts, any questions that you would like to add to the discussion, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can towards the end of the discussion before the second piece of music. Maybe it's a good moment to sort of talk about your early musical experiences, or how you sort of came up and how you've arrived here, and maybe some early musical experiences that you'd like to speak about or share, or your introduction to music maybe at first, and then maybe more experimental music later on, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, well, that's a really long story.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, I've covered a lot of territory, I guess, since the time I started. But there was a number of phases, I guess, that were, sort of influential and meaningful times of life, and all the things I absorbed during those times that carried on into the next phase. I don't know. I mean, going back to like a really young child and discovering what I liked about music and finding my own footing with music, which I kind of did at a pretty young age. I developed specific tastes for music that weren't really given to me or directed by anyone, that I just sort of developed on my own. So I guess that's always been kind of a theme, I guess, is that I've always just been sort of gravitated towards things that appeal to me in some way, or that I like, and that can sometimes be a little bit alarming when there's either like a misunderstanding for things I'm trying to do, or a sort of a negative idea about what's happening, or just lack of interest at all. Because the stuff that I spend my time with, I guess I'm pretty interested in, and so I don't know. I guess that's what everybody does, but. Yeah, just in terms of playing too, like, I lived in Chicago at one point. Also, I would just want to go back and correct. I don't live in Milwaukee anymore. I live in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, which is up in the
a little bit further up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm here now, but I mean, when I lived in Chicago, that was a really musical, influential time for me. I was studying with Hal Russell drums at the time, and of course, that opened up a very, wide world to me of things that I wasn't aware of, and was a great experience in general. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to like just the path of listening, and what things you discover and that you pursue, and that you keep digging deeper on. So it's not just finding something that you like and staying with it, but digging into maybe what those people that you admire were interested in, and what things they pursued, and just go as far as you can with it. And again, not accepting everything just because maybe some of your influences followed a certain way, but just always on the look for what else is happening and what new things there are to discover, because it never ends. Like that discovery process, I think a lot of people get to a point where they think like they found what they like and that's enough for them, or that they've heard it all or something, and that's just so untrue. There's always new things.
Absolutely. In the vein of discovering new musical experiences, or throwing yourself into new experiences, I was coming up with some questions for this interview. One thing that I was sort of ruminating on was how, as a percussionist, your experiences are probably different than a lot of other instrumentalists. Myself, I'm a guitar player. I don't really, I like to think that I am somewhat capable on that one instrument, but as a percussionist, there's an entire universe of instruments that you are sometimes either maybe not expected to have familiarity with, or maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but you're probably constantly discovering new instruments, whether they're membrane instruments or pitched percussion instruments, or even just found objects and things that you're playing with. I guess just how do you go about approaching a new physical instrument that might be different from what you have worked on in the past?
Yeah, that's a really great point, because when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a guitar player, and I started taking guitar lessons when I was maybe like 9 or so, and yeah, that was really what I wanted to pursue. I mean, I never ever thought about any other instrument than guitar. I did take piano lessons for a while just to help out with guitar, but that didn't really pan out for me so much. And then the guitar just kind of got diluted over time, and I just kind of lost track of playing an instrument. And it was a weird time, because even though I wasn't playing anything, in my mind, I still thought, someday I'm going to be a guitar player. And then eventually I realized, like, that's never going to happen, because you've sort of left it behind. It's not going to just one day magically occur. And so when I discovered drums, I was playing a friend's kit and just realized the openness to it. So like, as opposed to guitar, if you were to just pick up a guitar having never played one, it would be very obvious that you didn't know how to play it. But I found with drums, like, even though like I didn't know anything about playing certain beats or rhythms or anything, even just the sound of them, just touching the individual parts of the kit, had an inherent quality to it that was just open. It didn't demand you to know something. It sort of gave something to you right off the bat without having any prior knowledge. And that was the game changer for me. Like, I really just felt like this instrument was really inviting me in, whereas every other instrument sort of like you had to pay the price and then it would let you in. Mm-hmm. Drums were just much more open, and maybe that's just my experience and how I came into working with them, but that's really what it felt like to me. And so, to your point, I think that experience right off the bat as my first experience with the drums, that just became everything. I mean, even going back to the guitar since then, I've tried approaching the guitar in that way too, as I would say that first time with the drums, of just like seeing what sounds it can produce and what happens when you touch it and or strike it or do any sort of movement to create a sound from it. What happens then, as opposed to just I guess maybe thinking more about the human side of it and worrying about technique or worrying about not knowing enough or things like that. So with percussion, it's not something I like to focus on all the time, because I do really like the structure and the feel of rhythms and the energy that rhythms have. But percussion is just so near and dear to me because of that openness and that discovery that can happen, and sounds that you can be present with that you can't in other ways. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And going along with that, percussion instruments often are so deeply, maybe related is the wrong word, but deeply connected with the acoustic space that you're working in. And maybe that kind of goes back to that openness that you're talking about, that there's no necessarily, with the guitar you plug in and you have the fretboard and you work through the notes that are allowed there, if you're playing in a traditional sense, obviously.
Right.
But with a membrane instrument, a drum, any kind of found object, anything like that, you're really not just playing the object, but you're playing the room around you. I guess a question that I was thinking about going into this was, things have changed so radically over the last month. You might be, as someone who tours and performs in a lot of different spaces all year long, you get to a new room for every performance and you kind of scope out what the acoustics are like in that room and how things reverberate. and how each room might be a different experience, especially with a percussion instrument or with your particular work. Obviously, that's changed very radically over the past month or so, or past 2 months now. I guess I was wondering if you could speak to how that relationship exists in these sort of traditional circumstances, in different rooms that you might perform in, and also how you've had to adjust now, working on your performance practice in your own room by yourself in isolation.
Yeah, well, I guess the obvious part of that answer is that, clearly something is lost. I mean, I'm not able to do those things. I'm not able to have those experiences right now, and probably won't for some time. And that's just the way it is. That's not to say that, I also haven't been compelled to, play as often as I can here. And it's become somewhat of an issue where I really don't understand practice anymore. I don't understand playing even just for enjoyment, because the whole equation has been disrupted. And so for me, this time is really been about reevaluating the whole entire relationship. So I know for me, and the reason why at this point in my life I'm still involved in playing this instrument or these instruments and doing the things that I do, as only a part of it is about playing shows and playing in different rooms and having an audience and things like that. That's really just a part of it. There's something much deeper that's involved that I think this is a good time to sort of think about and reconnect with and understand what that is, and maybe how that influences or comes out in other parts of our lives that we maybe don't really give the time or credit to because we're just too busy booking shows and making records and all that, which is great. But what else is really behind that? And so I've been spending time working with that. And I think like using some of these not only earlier recordings, but then making new recordings simply for the purpose of recreating or recontextualizing so that I can play along with them, has been interesting in that regard, because now it's like I've become the reason to play. I'm the one that I'm playing to and for and with. And, I certainly hope I don't have to do that forever, but I think right now it's a great perception shift to think about why I'm involved in this and what I'm getting out of this and why I'm giving to it. Why have I spent so much of my time involved in this? And so this whole kind of circle of playing, really for myself and exploring what, discovering things that I want to discover with just an instrument in my home and not even really being able to go out and find other circumstances, which I really love doing. I really love finding different scenarios and contexts to fit or experience sound within. And I just can't do that now. But that's okay, because the alternative is just shutting down entirely. And I don't really have any interest in that either. So, I feel like this has been, there's definitely positives in this time. I think that is maybe easier for me to say than what some people might be experiencing. But I think that there is something positive about reevaluating your relationships on any level, no matter with what or whom or whatever.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask also if you could just talk about your Rhythmplex work and that ongoing project of yours, and also Ken Vandermark jumped in the chat to ask what it was like studying with Hal Russell. So maybe you could connect your studies with Hal forward into your work with Rhythmplex, or maybe just talk about those things independently, however you want to approach it.
Yeah, I'd say that there's maybe too long of a divide there, but I guess, I don't know, starting with Hal Russell, I mean, it was just a great experience. I have many, many fond memories of just spending that time with him and learning from him and just being amazed by not only his sense, his musicality, and his playing, but also just his personality and his gruffness and just his attitude about things. Didn't agree with him about a lot of things, but I appreciated the even those disagreements. I appreciated his standpoint because of just his character and his presentation. It never felt like somebody I wanted to argue with. It was more like, okay, you really don't like something that I like, and that's interesting, and I want to know why. And so we had some great discussions, and then seeing him perform too was, oh man, it was just wonderful. And the only regret that I ever feel every time I think of him is I had moved back to Milwaukee at some point, and I was trying to get to book him in Milwaukee, and I was still pretty young at the time, didn't have a lot of connections, but just had the ambition to do it. And fortunately, it never happened, and then he passed away, and never had the chance to bring him to Milwaukee. But that's part of it too. But yeah, the experience was just great. Yeah, it would be nice to talk to Ken in person someday about some of the stories and the things that he said specifically. But I'm sure you get a kick out of it. But Rhythmplex, switching to that, it's really, for the most part, it's something that I wanted to start that dealt with locations, like I said before, and dealt with different scenarios. So everything that I've done with it has been a way to sort of explore a different space, a different historical time and place, and then all the ideas surrounding either that location or just an idea itself, and then finding locations that sort of pointed toward those or spoke to those or something, and any other sort of data or information that could point towards those things, and creating projects around like a larger concept, I guess, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, in terms of music, but we also opened a store up here that very similarly, it's not, music project, but the same kind of an idea. We've taken a location and we've put something into it, and now we just observe what happens. And that's what everything has kind of been, is like getting into a certain idea or a certain place, and then just looking around and listening and seeing what happens in that situation. That's what Rhythmplex has really always been about.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I am going to pivot here to ask a couple audience questions, but really quickly want to mention if any other folks want to add questions to the mix, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. Philip Montoro asks, let me read this real quick, sorry. So Philip says that he heard you say once at a live event for the Trap Set podcast that you sometimes rehearse playing the same figure for an hour straight. He would like to know how you developed that kind of focus and discipline, and how long it took you to really focus in on that practice. And yeah, if you want to talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so like around 2006 or 2007, I was really doing a lot of percussion-based electroacoustic work, and had sort of left the drum kit behind for a while. And when I started getting back into playing the kit again, it was sort of a moment of reevaluation and saying, what do I want to do with this instrument? What do I want to use it for? And how do I want it to make me feel? And how do I hope it makes other people feel? So again, it's never, to me, about sitting down behind an instrument and just sort of showing chops or showing, here's what I know at this point, here's what I can do. It's, I'm really interested in the feel of things, the characteristics of things, and how those things communicate different messages. And so the repetitive playing was just something I started doing purely because of feel. And so I can't really tell you that it was something that, I worked on building up stamina, or I worked on, playing these repetitive beats over and over. I mean, it does go back to lessons. I mean, when you're doing drum lessons or any lessons, you're repeating things over and over. So certainly that's where, it first started for me. But I think when I really wanted to focus on playing more repetitive music, it was just simply a matter of doing it and then realizing that my own experience of getting tired and then thinking I should stop, but then saying, no, just keep going a little bit more. And then that feeling of what that experience was like when you get to a point of exhaustion and then you sort of find that second wind and you can keep going, you start to develop different things that your mind can do to help regulate that. So I developed different practices using my voice to help distract my body from getting tired. And so I would do these vocal things while I would be playing, and that my brain would be so focused on my voice and the sound of that because it's in my head, so it's the most present sound that I'm experiencing. But meanwhile, my body is doing this stuff, and I'm not really thinking about that anymore. And that was a turning point for me to where I knew I developed a sort of control and could do what I want with it. And then taking your mind back into your body and understanding what your body is doing, and then having it add this whole second rush of energy into your playing is a really fulfilling experience. But I think from an audience standpoint, when they realize like, okay, he's got to be getting tired now, and then all of a sudden this almost new player comes into the mix and just takes it off from there, is really an exhilarating experience for the audience as well. And so everyone kind of shares that. I became really interested in that whole situation of that happening. And so for me, repetition is about finding that experience and playing with it, because it's always going to be a little bit different. But yeah, I guess just it's more of a practice with your mind than it is with developing any sort of like long-term stamina. I'm not a big guy. I don't like, lift weights. I'm not like this, guy who's like working on my arm strength to like do these endurance things. It's not what it's about. It's really all in your head, and your head can make yourself do many, many things that you wouldn't expect or think's possible.
Mm-hmm. We're here talking with Jon Mueller. I just want to remind everyone, if you've got any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. One thing that I was wondering as I was pouring through your discography before this talk tonight, I noticed there was a record that you played on with Bayard Lancaster. And I was wondering if you could speak about how that recording came about, how you got involved with him, and yeah, if you wanted to just talk about that recording at all.
That's a really unfortunate topic. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't involved with Bayard at all. And in fact, I wasn't involved with that recording at all. And I think that's probably all I should say about it.
Okay, fair enough. I apologize then.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not bad like that. It's just, it's
Right.
sort of a misleading record, so to speak.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, if there are not any questions from the audience, I do have one more, or maybe it's not so much a question, but I just wanted to see if you could talk about the next piece a little bit, maybe preface anything that you want or not, leave it to the imagination. But if there was anything that you wanted to discuss in regards to the second piece tonight.
I don't think there's anything really worth discussing that wouldn't just either give things away or overly explain. So yeah, I'll just play it.
Alrighty, sounds good. If there are not any other questions, then I think I'll turn it back over to Jon to perform his second piece of music here. Everyone, please thank Jon Mueller one more time. Applause at home, even though we can't all be in the same room together. All right, I'll leave it to Jon here. Thank you so much, Jon. was a wonderful
Thank,
performance. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we sign off here, I just want to remind everyone to continue tuning into the quarantine concerts that happen nearly every night on this channel, and also specifically the Option Series streams that will be happening every week at 8 p.m. Central, almost just like the usual in-person Option events. But you can tune here to the channel every week at 8 Central and hear wonderful performances and discussions. I believe next week is Sonia La Bianca performing solo and in discussion with Tim Daisy. So definitely come on back then and tune in for that. But I just really want to quickly thank Alex and everyone at ESS for helping facilitate the stream and doing all the work on the quarantine concerts as always. And Ken and Tim, my fellow curators of the series. And one more time, a big round of applause for Jon Mueller for performing tonight. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.